Now we're working. Okay, that wasn't good. First 30 seconds didn't work. Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. I am really excited to be sitting here together with you, with author, expert, speaker, Shai Ben Tekoa. He has written a phenomenal book. Phenomenal book. Really important. I can't tell you how important this book is. He has unbelievable research. And like I titled this video, the term Palestine or Palestinians are anti-Semitic terms. I'm not going to go into it. Shai is going to go into it. He has all the research to prove it. But let me start, before I start asking Shai questions to tell us about this book, I'm going to read two of these reviews written here on the back, all right? The back of Phantom Nation. Where, by the way, I'm already putting it out there. Where can people purchase this? Where do they go?
You can go online to GeffenPublishing.com or Amazon.com or from your local bookstore. You can.
Okay.
There's also a Kindle version.
Buy this book. All right, Kindle version as well. Right, so go to Amazon.com, go to Geffen Publishing. Here are two reviews of this book. Everyone must buy this book. Review number 1. Meticulously researched and packed with more information than any single book on the history of Israel, Ben Tekoa understands the role that the Quran and Islam have played in the Muslim-Arab war against Israel and goes beyond some of the best books on the conflict, including The Late Irish Politician. Okay. I highly recommend Ben Tekoa's work. Phantom Nation belongs in homes, libraries, and should be studied by all Israel support organizations. Unbelievable, and it says it all. Review number 2, and then we're going to go into this, guys. A refreshing, intimate, and comprehensive understanding of the history and politics of the reason that must be told, because no one talks about this. With eloquence, clarity, and an entertaining flair, the author records the contrived false narratives designed to destroy the modern Israeli state. Brilliantly presented, profound, refreshing, and fascinating. This book is a must-read, folks. A must-read. Phantom Nation, Inventing the Palestinians as the Obstacles to Peace. You have to know this, folks. Shai, why did you write this book?
I wrote this book because I'm an old guy and remember a world without Palestinians. It's hard to believe for people today, but from the 1950s into the 1970s, they were not an issue. They're not mentioned in any UN resolution until 1970.
Wait a second. The term Palestinians or Palestine is not mentioned by the United Nations until 1970?
Yes, that's the first quarter century of the UN's existence.
Wait a second, but there was supposed to be a Palestinian state by the partition plan in 1947, no?
No, that's first of all, it's a recommendation. It's not mandatory. The UN General Assembly resolutions have no power. They're basically just recommendations. The Arabs rejected it, and so that's the end of that.
Wait, yeah, but was the term Palestinians or Palestine mentioned in the resolution?
No, the resolution of 1947 speaks of an Arab state, which I show would have been the fourth Arab state with a piece of Palestine. At this very moment, classical Palestine is divided between 4 states. When they talk about a 2-state solution, they're talking about a 5-state solution. The arithmetic stinks. There are, at this moment, 4 states with a piece of Palestine.
4 states?
Yes. Yeah. Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, and Israel all have a piece. And those 3 Arab states, Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, they have more than half. Specifically, they have 53% of the classical map of Palestine, which is a synonym for Eretz Yisrael.
Do you want to use this? Because you showed this to me and it was powerful. This is the classical map. So how are you defining the classical map of Palestine? Where did that definition come from?
Very good question.
Right here.
Well, what you got there is a artificial map that I had a cartographer create, taking a black and white map of Palestine from 1898, and I had him add the modern lines and the modern names. And with a computer program, it was possible to see that 53% of it is in Arab hands right now. What people say, this is people on the right now, they say, the Arabs got 77% of Palestine. This is just not so. They got 77% of the League of Nations map used in 1922, which was a phony map. The Arabs sort of sold a bill of goods. The British blew up the map of Palestine and said, here, take 3/4, take 77%. That's not Palestine. Palestine was the substitute name for Eretz Yisrael, basically Yehudah, Judea for the Latin. For 200 years, the Romans called it Judea. That was left of the original tribes. And then they changed it to Palestina. And that never existed as a state for all of history. It never existed for the Muslims. There's no reference to it in the Quran. They never had a Palestinian king. They never had a Palestinian country. They never had a Palestinian map. Palestine, nothing. Until the 20th century, when you read the League of Nations mandate, it's clear from the language they're inventing a Palestine that did not exist in 1922. The name has no meaning to Arabs. It never had any meaning to Arabs. The League of Nations created a Palestine as the historic Jewish homeland. That's the text. That's why it was created for us. And not only that, Faisal of Arabia, he agreed to it. Everything east of the river would go to the Arabs. That's a piece of Palestine. My Palestine is the map that was Palestine at the time of the Balfour Declaration in 1917. My book contains a half a dozen maps that were in use, and they're all pretty much the same. And the boundaries that are used are those found in the Chumash, in the first book of Genesis, and also in the book of Numbers. There are word maps. Of course, we don't have graphics in the Torah.
It explains.
We have from this to that, from Sidon to Gaza, and so on and so forth. So we know the map of Eretz Yisrael in the text. And that's what people based their maps of Palestine on, which was like Atlantis for 2,000 years. It didn't exist. It was a memory of people's minds, a Palestine as a substitute for the Holy Land, which meant something to Jews and to Christians.
Right.
No meaning to Muslims. So you ask, how did this book get started? I remember a world without these Palestinians. At the same time, I knew one of the propagandists face-to-face, Edward Said, who was a professor at Columbia University. I knew him before he became what I call an ancient Palestinian. He was a Lebanese Christian.
But you were a student? You were a student of his at
I was a
Columbia?
student of his at Columbia a year before the Six-Day War.
Okay, so we're talking about 1966, and he came across and introduced himself as a Lebanese Christian.
Correct, and not even a Maronite. He was the Church of England. His father was desperate to be an American or an Englishman. He was born in Jerusalem, but that was incidental. He had no roots there. He grew up in Cairo, where his father had a business. They were Lebanese Christians, and it was only after the war that he began marketing himself as a Palestinian refugee. Not until...
Total lie.
Total lie. He never was a refugee at all. His father was quite wealthy. He ran around in a limousine in Cairo.
Wow.
It was all nonsense with him. It was all a lie, but that's okay.
Wow.
That's the culture. So the book really got started after this Gulf War of 1991, the Gulf War, when I was hired by the Chief of Staff, Prime Minister Shamir, to do a statistical analysis of voting patterns at the UN. President Bush and Secretary of State James Baker wanted an international peace conference under the UN, and Prime Minister Shamir said, nothing doing. They won't give us a fair shake. They said, oh, you're being a paranoid Jew. It'll be all right. So one of the things they did was to hire me to research the voting patterns at the UN, and I spent several months and read 870 resolutions at the UN on the Arab-Israeli conflict, tabulated it, and at the same time, for my own purposes, came across and discovered the first resolution referencing the Palestinians, which came in 1970. Until then, the Arab position was, into the 60s, there is no such place as Palestine. That was their position.
Their official position.
Yes.
And you mentioned that was Hajj Amin al-Husseini's position also.
Hajj Amin al-Husseini, that was his line. He was a Muslim Grand Mufti. He said nothing about Palestine. You understand that the Muslims, the Arabs in general, have no sense of nationalism to this day, which is why Hamas wins the parliament they set up in Ramallah back in 2006.
Right. It's religion. It's all about religion.
It's all religion because they have no sense of nationalism. And that's what it always was.
Right, and the West still deludes itself that there's Syrians, Lebanese, Iraqis.
It's not only the West. Sad to say, one of the most responsible parties for the invention of Palestinians was the Jewish left. Here and there.
That's true.
Yossi Beilin, Tzipi Livni, both of them had said almost the identical sentences. They say, if we define the problem as a religious conflict, then there's no solution. If we define it as a political conflict, then we can have some kind of nice compromise, which is lunacy. Yeah. They want the conflict to be the way they want it to be rather than the way it is.
They basically admitted, we are going to be doctors and misdiagnose a treatment. Therefore, no matter what solution they came up with, it will fail.
That's the metaphor I use in my book. You go to the doctor and he says, looks like cancer, but I'm not an oncologist, let's call it the flu. That's what they have done, the left. They want, the left is desperate to be able to deal with a parallel ancient nation which also loves the same country, and we both have the same thing in common, and we'll work out a nice compromise.
Right.
But it has no basis in truth.
Right, which is why no peace deal will ever bring peace.
Baruch Hashem, that's exactly right. And that's why Oslo was a fraud from day one.
Right.
Because they're not fighting over land, they're not fighting over percentages. They cannot tolerate, Islam cannot tolerate the existence of a Jewish independent state in what they call Islamic territory.
Right. I just want to take a break for a second. Everyone who's joined, I just want to tell you, there's so much to talk about with Shai. You can see there's a lot of synergy. A lot of what Shai has researched and written in his book are information points that I'm always talking about. I'm not as knowledgeable as Shai, but look at this. The information, his knowledge, is not just fill one book. It fills 2 books. There is so much information out there, folks, that we need to know. And it's not about defending Israel. It's about defending our Jewish identity. You have to know the truth. You have to know this, that this is a fiction that was created to destroy Israel and therefore to destroy the Jewish people. We're going to touch upon some things. Definitely buy it in order for you to educate yourselves. And you mentioned in terms of that it was Hajj Amin al-Husseini himself who said there is no such thing as Palestine. It was called Southern Syria. And you also mentioned something else before we started talking. You mentioned that even the West Bank. You want to talk about the reference of the West Bank? And you said a powerful statement before. You said the fact that the Arabs and the world use the West Bank as a territorial description that belongs to the Palestinians is proof in of itself that they're a fiction.
Correct.
So please explain.
It's not used in the partition plan of November of 1947. The words they use are, you've heard them before, Samaria and Judea.
The 1947 partition plan uses Judea and Samaria?
Yeah, well, actually, it's Samaria and Judea. But
Samaria and Judea. Okay. Well, I didn't even know that either. Okay.
That's the sequence.
Right.
Samaria and Judea. And that's on all the maps until the 70s. I have my own Rand McNally map from 1969, which shows in crosshatch the areas that Israel conquered in 67. But then in a little legend beneath it, it says, yes, this is what was conquered. But the name West Bank doesn't appear. What does appear, they're using an old map. Right. And shows Judea and Samaria with the Latin spelling Judgaea, the old Latin spelling.
Wow. Wait 1 second. Someone's asking, where do you buy your book? Amazon.com, GeffenPublishing.com, Phantom Nation. Just type it in and purchase it. This is a must-buy book. Thank you, Anna, for asking, and everyone else, buy it. Go. Continue.
So what West Bank was not in use at the time of the Six-Day War. What the New York Times referred to was the western bank of the Jordan River with a lowercase w and a lowercase b. And over 1968, one of my chapters is called Inventing the West Bank, because over the next year, they couldn't decide at the New York Times whether to call it the Western Bank or the West-Bank or uppercase, lowercase, and each corresponded a different way. They couldn't decide. And this shows you that there was never any Palestinian people who claimed to be the indigenous people. Every indigenous people on the planet gives names to its rivers, its mountains, its lakes. They never had a name.
It's land.
It's land. It gives no name. They never had a name for what they now call the West Bank. There's no name for it.
Right, there's no name.
What are they talking about? In fact, Hajj Amin started a newspaper in 1919 during the peace conference in Paris, and it's called, in Arabic, Southern Syria.
Right, because that's what it was.
That's what it was. They never recognized a separate geography. They never had a culture, a language, a cuisine. You've never eaten in a Palestinian restaurant. Every nation indigenous has its own cuisine. They have no Palestinian cuisine.
Right.
There's nothing there. There's not one book in any library on the planet in which you can read the history of this allegedly ancient nation.
What's so cool? He has more information, basically proving how they don't exist, than they have information to prove that they do exist. They have no information to prove that they exist. They have nothing.